She had covered tech booms from Silicon Valley to Shenzhen, interviewed visionaries from Steve Jobs to Jack Ma. But the conversation that shattered her understanding of innovation happened in an unlikely place, a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. It was during a rocket alert in 2021. As sirens wailed across the city, Christiane Amanpour found herself crammed into an underground shelter with a dozen Israeli tech entrepreneurs. While chaos reigned above, these young founders were calmly pitching business ideas to each other, coding on their phones, and closing million-dollar deals via encrypted messaging apps. "This is normal for us," explained Sarah Chen, a 26-year-old AI developer whose startup had just raised $50 million. "We've been having board meetings in bomb shelters since we were kids. Pressure doesn't stop innovation here. It accelerates it." That moment crystallized a realization that had been building throughout her decades of Middle East reporting. The conventional wisdom about Israeli innovation, that it succeeds despite the region's instability, was completely backwards. Israel doesn't innovate despite the pressure. It innovates because of it. This is the story of how extreme stress creates extreme creativity, and why the most advanced technologies on Earth are being developed by people who grew up running to bomb shelters. The innovation myth. When business schools analyze Israeli innovation, they focus on the wrong variables entirely. They point to government R&D spending, military technology transfer, and the famous chutzpah culture. These explanations satisfy Western audiences because they fit familiar narratives about entrepreneurship and state investment, but they miss the fundamental catalyst: perpetual existential pressure. In Silicon Valley, the worst-case scenario for a failed startup is professional embarrassment and financial loss. In Tel Aviv, the worst-case scenario has always been annihilation. This creates a completely different relationship with risk, failure, and innovation timelines. Americans optimize for comfort, observes Dr. Amnon Shashua, founder of Mobileye, the autonomous vehicle company Intel acquired for $15.3 billion. Israelis optimize for survival. The technologies are completely different. Consider the numbers that business analysts rarely discuss. Israel produces more patents per capita than any nation on Earth. It has more publicly traded companies on NASDAQ than any country outside the United States. It attracts more venture capital per capita than Silicon Valley. But here's the statistic that reveals the true source. 68% of Israeli tech founders are military veterans, compared to 8% in Silicon Valley. This isn't about technology transfer from military to civilian applications, though that occurs. It's about psychological conditioning. Israeli entrepreneurs aren't building companies. They're building survival systems, the pressure laboratory. To understand this dynamic, you must understand what it means to grow up in Israel. Every 18-year-old faces mandatory military service in one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. But this isn't just about learning technical skills. It's about absorbing a specific mindset, the assumption that comfortable solutions will fail when they matter most. Take Unit 8200, Israel's elite intelligence division. This unit, roughly equivalent to America's NSA, recruits teenagers and gives them responsibilities that would terrify experienced professionals in other countries. 18-year-old analysts monitor real-time threats to national security. 19-year-old programmers develop cyber warfare capabilities. 20-year-old team leaders make decisions that can prevent or trigger international incidents. The psychological effect is profound. These young people internalize the understanding that failure isn't just professional disappointment, it's potential catastrophe. They develop what psychologists call catastrophic thinking, but in a constructive rather than paralyzing way. When you've spent 2 years knowing that your mistake could get people killed, launching a startup feels relatively low stakes, explains Yoav Shoham, former Israeli intelligence officer turned venture capitalist. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs talk about failing fast. We've been failing under real consequences since we were teenagers. This creates entrepreneurs who think differently about product development, market timing, and resource allocation. While American startups often pursue minimum viable products and iterative development, Israeli startups tend to over-engineer for extreme scenarios from day one. Consider Waze, the navigation app Google acquired for $1.1 billion. American competitors focused on optimizing routes for normal traffic conditions. Waze's Israeli founders designed their system assuming roads could become impassable due to rocket attacks, terrorist incidents, or military operations. This worst case first, engineering made Waze superior even in peaceful conditions because it could handle any disruption. The anxiety advantage. Western psychology typically treats anxiety as a disorder to be managed or eliminated. Israeli innovation culture has weaponized anxiety as a competitive advantage. This isn't about stress management or mindfulness techniques. It's about channeling existential fear into creative problem solving. The psychological literature calls this post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where extreme stress can enhance rather than diminish cognitive performance. But in Israel, this isn't a therapeutic concept. It's an economic strategy. We don't try to reduce uncertainty, explains Professor Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist. We build systems that perform better under uncertainty. This gives us advantages in markets that haven't even become uncertain yet. This manifests in product design philosophy that puzzles international investors. Israeli startups routinely overbuild their initial products, incorporating security features, redundant systems, and failure modes that seem excessive for their target markets. But when global markets eventually face the disruptions that Israelis assume from day one, cyber attacks, supply chain failures, geopolitical instability, these over-engineered Israeli solutions suddenly become essential. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a perfect case study. While most countries struggled to implement digital health passes, contact tracing, and real-time epidemic monitoring, Israel deployed these systems within weeks. Why? Because Israeli tech companies had been building pandemic response technologies for years, assuming that biological warfare or natural disasters would eventually require such capabilities. We don't build for the market as it is, says Erel Margalit, veteran Israeli venture capitalist. We build for the market as it will be when everything goes wrong. The network effect. But individual psychology explains only part of the Israeli innovation phenomenon. The real multiplier is how this pressure-forged mindset creates unique collaborative networks. In Silicon Valley, entrepreneurship is often portrayed as a heroic individual journey. Founders compete against each other for market share, talent, and investor attention. Israeli tech culture operates more like a military unit facing a common enemy. Competitors share intelligence, resources, and talent because individual success means nothing if the entire ecosystem fails. This creates what economists call co-opetition, competitive cooperation, but taken to extremes that would be impossible in less pressured environments. Israeli tech executives routinely share proprietary information with their direct competitors when facing common threats like European privacy regulations, Chinese market access restrictions, or American export controls. "We fight each other like brothers," explains Shay Agassi, founder of Better Place, the electric vehicle company that failed spectacularly but created technologies now standard across the industry. But when outsiders threaten any of us, we're all Israeli first, competitors second. This network effect extends internationally through what Israelis call the tribe. Israeli entrepreneurs who succeed globally become nodes in an intelligence and resource sharing network that spans continents. When an Israeli startup seeks expansion into Asian markets, they can access on-the-ground intelligence from Israeli entrepreneurs already operating in those markets. Intelligence that would cost American competitors millions to acquire through consultants and market research. The result is an innovation ecosystem that performs like a distributed military intelligence operation rather than a traditional business community. The dark side. This pressure-driven innovation system produces extraordinary results, but it also creates extraordinary dysfunction. The same psychological conditioning that generates breakthrough technologies also generates burnout, anxiety disorders, and social fragmentation at rates far above global averages. Israeli tech workers report depression rates 40% higher than their American counterparts. Divorce rates among Israeli tech entrepreneurs exceed 60%. The military-industrial mindset that drives innovation also drives a winner-take-all mentality that can destroy personal relationships and community cohesion. "We're very good at building things that work under pressure," admits Chen Moshkowitz, founder of 3 successful Israeli startups. "We're terrible at building sustainable human communities. The machine optimizes for survival, not happiness." This creates a paradox that Israeli society is only beginning to confront. The same system that makes Israel a global innovation powerhouse may be undermining the social fabric that innovation ultimately serves. Young Israelis increasingly seek opportunities abroad, not just for professional advancement, but for psychological relief from the perpetual pressure that their parents' generation learned to weaponize. The question facing Israeli innovation culture is whether it can maintain its competitive advantages while creating space for normal human flourishing, or whether the pressure cooker that forged their success will eventually consume the people who built it. The global implications. But the Israeli innovation model isn't just a local curiosity. It's a preview of how all innovation ecosystems may need to operate in an increasingly unstable world. Climate change, cyber warfare, supply chain vulnerabilities, and geopolitical instability are creating pressure conditions globally that resemble what Israel has always faced locally. The technologies and organizational models that seem extreme in the Israeli context are becoming necessary everywhere else. American tech companies are quietly hiring Israeli security firms to protect their operations. European governments are adopting Israeli-developed crisis management systems. Asian manufacturers are implementing Israeli-designed supply chain resilience protocols. What Israel built out of necessity, everyone else will build out of wisdom, predicts Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn founder and frequent Israeli tech investor. The question is whether they can develop pressure-driven innovation capabilities before the pressure becomes existential. This is why Israeli entrepreneurs are increasingly confident about global competition despite their small domestic market. They're not just competing against current solutions. They're building solutions for a future where everyone will face the pressures that Israelis have always faced. The pressure cooker that forged Israeli innovation isn't unique to Israeli conditions anymore. It's the prototype for how innovation will work when the entire world feels like Israel. The choice. So everything you know about Israeli innovation is wrong because you've been looking at the wrong variables. It's not about government policy, military spending, or cultural attitudes toward risk. It's about what happens when an entire society learns to transform existential pressure into creative advantage. This raises an uncomfortable question for the rest of the world. As global pressures intensify, will other societies learn to innovate like Israel? Or will they break under pressures that Israelis learned to weaponize generations ago? The answer will determine not just which countries lead the next phase of technological development, but whether human civilization can build its way out of the mounting crises that threaten its continuation. The pressure cooker is heating up globally. The question is whether the world can learn from the society that learned to thrive in the kitchen.